Boris Abramovich Berezovsky was a Russian business oligarch, government official, engineer and mathematician. He was a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Berezovsky was politically opposed to the President of Russia Vladimir Putin since Putin's election in 2000 and remained a vocal critic of Putin for the rest of his life. In late 2000, after the Russian Deputy Prosecutor General demanded that Berezovsky appear for questioning, he did not return from abroad and moved to the UK, which granted him political asylum in 2003. In Russia he was later convicted in absentia of fraud and embezzlement. The first charges were brought during Primakov's government in 1999. Despite an Interpol red notice for Berezovsky's arrest, Russia repeatedly failed to obtain the extradition of Berezovsky from Britain, which became a major point of diplomatic tension between the two countries. Berezovsky made his fortune in Russia in the 1990s when the country went through privatization of state property. He profited from gaining control over various assets, including the country's main television channel, Channel 1. In 1997, Forbes magazine estimated Berezovsky's wealth at $3 billion. He was at the height of his power in the later Yeltsin years, when he was Deputy Secretary of Russia's Security Council, a friend of Boris Yeltsin's influential daughter Tatyana, and a member of the Yeltsin family. Berezovsky helped fund Unity, the political party, which formed Vladimir Putin's parliamentary base, and was elected to the Duma on Putin's slate. However, following the Russian presidential election in March 2000, Berezovsky went into opposition and resigned from the Duma. After he moved to Britain, the government took over his television assets, and he divested from other Russian holdings. In 2012, Berezovsky lost a London High Court case he brought over the ownership of Sibneft against Roman Abramovich, in which he sought over £3 billion in damages. The court judged Berezovsky as an inherently unreliable witness, who regarded truth as a transitory, flexible concept, which could be molded to suit his current purposes, and that, at times, the evidence which he gave was deliberately dishonest. Sometimes he was clearly making his evidence up as he went along in response to the perceived difficulty in answering the questions. The court concluded that Berezovsky had never been a co-owner of Sibneft. Berezovsky was found dead at his home, Titness Park, at Sunning Hill, near Ascot in Berkshire, on the 23rd of March 2013. A post-mortem examination found that his death was consistent with hanging and that there were no signs of a violent struggle. However, the coroner at the inquest into Berezovsky's death later recorded an open verdict. Early life, scientific research and engineering experience. Boris Abramovich Berezovsky was born in 1946 in Moscow to Abram Markovich Berezovsky, a Jewish civil engineer in construction works, and his wife, Anna Alexandrovna Gelman. Berezovsky always stressed his Jewish heritage, although by Jewish law he was not Jewish, as his maternal grandmother was not Jewish. He studied applied mathematics, receiving his doctorate in 1983. After graduating from the Moscow Forestry Engineering Institute in 1968, Berezovsky worked as an engineer from 1969 till 1987, serving as assistant research officer, and finally the head of a department in the Institute of Control Sciences of the USSR Academy of Sciences. Berezovsky conducted research on optimization and control theory, publishing 16 books and articles between 1975 and 1989. Political and business career in Russia. Accumulation of wealth. In 1989, Berezovsky took advantage of the opportunities presented by perestroika to found Logovas with Badri Patarkatishvili and senior managers from Avtovaz. Logovaz developed software for AvtoVAZ, sold Soviet-made cars and serviced foreign cars. The dealership profited from hyperinflation by taking cars on consignment and paying the producer at a later date when the money lost much of its value. One of Berezovsky's early endeavors was AVVA, a venture fund he formed in 1993 with Alexander Voloshin and AvtoVAZ chairman Vladimir. Berezovsky controlled about 30% of the company, which raised nearly $50 million from small investors through a bonded loan to build a plant producing a people's car. The project did not collect sufficient funds for the plant, and the funds were instead invested into AvtoVAZ production, while the debt to investors was swapped for equity. By 2000, AVVA held about one-third of AvtoVAZ. In 1994, Berezovsky was the target of the car bombing incident, but survived the assassination attempt, in which his driver was killed and he was injured. Alexander Litvinenko led the FSB investigation into the incident and linked the crime to the resistance of the Soviet-era AvtoVAZ management to Berezovsky's growing influence in the Russian automobile market. Berezovsky's involvement in the Russian media began in December 1994, when he gained control over ORT television to replace the failing Soviet Channel 1. He appointed the popular anchorman and producer Vladislav Listyev as CEO of ORT. 3 months later, Listyev was assassinated amid a fierce struggle for control of advertising sales. Berezovsky was questioned in the police investigation, among many others, but the killers were never found. Under Berezovsky's stewardship, ORT became a major asset of the reformist camp as they prepared to face communists and nationalists in the upcoming presidential elections. From 1995 to 1997, through the controversial loans for shares privatization auctions, Berezovsky and Patar Katsishvili assisted Roman Abramovich in acquiring control of Sibneft, the sixth largest Russian oil company, which constituted the bulk of his wealth. In an article in The Washington Post in 2000, Berezovsky revealed that the American financier George Soros declined an invitation to participate in the acquisition. In 1995, he played a key role in a management reshuffle at Aeroflot and participated in its corporatization, with his close associate Nikolai Glushkov becoming Aeroflot CFO. In January 1998, it was announced that Sibneft would merge with Mikhail Khodorkovsky's Yukos to create the third largest oil company in the world. The merger was abandoned 5 months later amid falling oil prices. Berezovsky entered the Kremlin's inner circle in 1993 through arranging for the publication of Yeltsin's memoirs and befriended Valentin Yumashev, the president's ghostwriter. In January 1996, at the World Economic Forum at Davos, Berezovsky liaised with fellow oligarchs to form an alliance, which later became known as the Davos Pact, to bankroll Boris Yeltsin's campaign in the upcoming presidential elections. On his return to Moscow, Berezovsky met and befriended Tatyana Dyachenko, Yeltsin's daughter, according to a later profile by The Guardian. Berezovsky masterminded the 1996 re-election of Boris Yeltsin. He and his billionaire friends coughed up £140 million for Yeltsin's campaign. In the summer of 1996, Berezovsky had emerged as a key advisor to Yeltsin, allied with Anatoly Chubais, opposing a group of hardliners led by General Alexander Korsakov. One night in June, in the drawing room of Club Logovaz, Berezovsky, Chubais and others plotted the ouster of Korsakov. Korsakov and other hardliners. On the 20th of June 1996, Yeltsin fired Korsakov and 2 other hawks, leaving the reformers' team in full control of the Kremlin. Firing them was controversial though, as Korsakov a few days before caught 2 of Yeltsin's campaign organizers carrying $500,000 United States dollars cash without invoices out of presidential administration building. On the 16th of June 1996, Yeltsin came first in the first round of elections after forging a tactical alliance with Gen. Alexander Lebed, who finished third. On the 3rd of July, in the runoff vote, he beat the communist Gennady Zyuganov. His victory was due largely to the support of the TV networks controlled by Guzinski and Berezovsky and the money from the business elite. The New York Times called Berezovsky the public spokesman and chief lobbyist for this new elite, which moved from the shadows to respectability in a few short years. In 1999, Alexander Korsakov repeated allegations that when he was the head of the Kremlin's security service, Boris Berezovsky tried to convince him to murder Moscow Mayor Yuri Luzkov, popular crooner and Duma deputy Yosef Kobzon, a Luzkov ally, a media tycoon Vladimir Guzinski, the founder of Russian TV channel NTV, role in Chechen conflict. On the 17th of October 1996, Yeltsin dismissed General Alexander Lebed from the position of National Security Advisor amid allegations that he was plotting a coup and secretly mustering a private army. Lebed promptly accused Berezovsky and Guzinski of engineering his ouster, and formed a coalition with the disgraced General Alexander Korsakov. The dismissal of Lebed, the architect of the Kashvyurt peace accord, left Yeltsin's Chechen policy in limbo. On the 30th of October 1996, in a political bombshell, Yeltsin named Ivan Rybkin as his new national security advisor and appointed Berezovsky deputy secretary in charge of Chechnya with a mandate to oversee the implementation of the Kashvyurt Accord, that is, the withdrawal of Russian forces, the negotiation of a peace treaty and the preparation of a general election. On the 19th of December 1996, Berezovsky made headlines by negotiating the release of 21 Russian policemen held hostage by the warlord Salman Raduev amid efforts by radicals from both sides to torpedo peace negotiations. On the 12th of May 1997, Yeltsin and Maskhadov signed the Russian-Chechen peace treaty in the Kremlin. Speaking at a press conference in Moscow, Berezovsky outlined his priorities for the economic reconstruction of Chechnya, particularly the construction of a pipeline for transporting Azerbaijani oil. He called upon the Russian business community to contribute to the rebuilding of the republic, revealing his own donation of $1 million for a cement factory in Grozny. This payment would come to haunt him years later, when he was accused of funding Chechen terrorists. After his dismissal from the Security Council, Berezovsky vowed to continue his activities in Chechnya as a private individual and maintained contact with Chechen warlords. He was instrumental in the release of 69 hostages, including 2 Britons, John James and Camilla Carr, whom he flew in his private jet to RAF Bryce Norton in September 1998. In an interview with Thomas Duval in 2005, he revealed the involvement of the British ambassador to Russia, Sir Andrew Wood, and explained that his former negotiations counterpart, the Islamic militant leader Muvladi Udugov, helped arrange the Britain's release. Berezovsky had a phone conversation with Muvladi Udugov in the spring of 1999, 6 months before the beginning of fighting in Dagestan. A transcript of the conversation was leaked to a Moscow tabloid on 10 September 1999 and appeared to mention the would-be militants' invasion. It has been the subject of much speculation ever since. As Berezovsky explained later in interviews to Deval and Goldfarb, Udugov proposed to coordinate the Islamists' incursion into Dagestan, so that a limited Russian response would topple the Chechen President Aslan Maskhadov and establish a new Islamic Republic, which would be anti-American but friendly to Russia. Berezovsky said that he disliked the idea, but reported Udugov's overture to Prime Minister Stepashin. Udugov and Bashav, he asserted, conspired with Stepashin and Putin to provoke a war to topple Maskhadov, but the agreement was for the Russian army to stop at the Terek River. However, Putin double-crossed the Chechens and started an all-out war battle with young reformers. In March 1997, Berezovsky and Tatyana Dyachenko flew to Nizhny Novgorod to persuade the city's governor, Boris Nemtsov, to join Chabay's economic team, which became known as the Government of Young Reformers. This was the last concerted political action of the Davos Pact. 4 months later, the group split into two cliques fiercely competing for Yeltsin's favor. The clash was precipitated by the privatization auction of the communication utilities Vyazunvest, in which Oneximbank of Chabay's loyalist Vladimir Potanin, backed by George Soros, competed with Guzinski, allied with Spanish Telefonica. An initially commercial dispute swiftly developed into a contest of political wills between Chabay and Berezovsky. Potanin's victory unleashed a bitter media war, in which ORT and NTV accused the Chabay group of fixing the auction in favor of Potanin, whereas Chabay charged Berezovsky with abusing his government position to advance his business interests. Both sides appealed to Yeltsin, who had proclaimed a new era of fair privatization based on strict legislative rules and allowing no deviations. In the end, both sides lost. Berezovsky's media revealed a corrupt scheme whereby a publishing house owned by Oneximbank paid Chabay and his group hefty advances for a book that was never written. The scandal led to a purge of Chabay's loyalists from the government. Chabay retaliated by persuading Yeltsin to dismiss Boris Berezovsky from the National Security Council. Berezovsky's service on the Security Council ended on 5 November 1997. Source called the Berezovsky-Chabay clash a historical event, in the reality of which I would have never believed if I had not watched it myself. I saw a fight of the people in the boat floating towards the edge of a waterfall. He argued that the reformist camp never recovered from the wounds sustained in this struggle, setting the political stage for conservative nationalists, and eventually Vladimir Putin. Philanthropy. Berezovsky was reportedly the only person who, after the Kamadan Gorge tragedy when an avalanche buried the film crew of the Russian director Sergei Bodrov, immediately allocated a large sum of money for the search for survivors. In 1991, Berezovsky founded the Triumph Award, bestowed upon outstanding Russian poets, musicians, artists, directors and ballet dancers. The Kremlin family and Putin's rise to power. In the spring of 1998, Berezovsky made an unexpected political comeback, starting with his appointment, in April 1998, to the position of Executive Secretary of the Commonwealth of Independent States. He emerged in the center of a new informal power group, the family, a close-knit circle of advisors around Yeltsin, which included Yeltsin's daughter Tatyana and his chief of Staff, Yumashev. It was rumored that no important government appointment could happen without the family's support. By 1999, the family also included two of Berezovsky's associates, his former AVVA partner Alexander Voloshin, who replaced Yumashev as Yeltsin's chief of staff, and Roman Abramovich. The principal concern of the family was finding an electable successor to Yeltsin to counter the presidential aspirations of the then Prime Minister, Yevgeny Primakov, who was leaning to more statist positions. Political battles between the family and Primakov's camp dominated the 2 last years of Yeltsin's presidency. In November 1998, in a televised press conference, 5 officers of the FSB, led by Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Litvinenko, revealed an alleged plot by the superiors to assassinate Berezovsky. In April 1999, Russia's Prosecutor General, Yuri Skuratov, opened an investigation into embezzlement at Aeroflot and issued an arrest warrant for Berezovsky, who called the investigation politically motivated and orchestrated by Primakov. Nikolai Glushkov, Aeroflot's former general director, later revealed that conflict with Primakov arose from the irritation that Berezovsky's management team caused in the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, which Primakov headed before becoming Prime Minister, over firing of thousands of spies who used Aeroflot as a front organization in Soviet times. The arrest warrant was dropped a week later after Berezovsky submitted to questioning by the prosecutors. No charges were brought. Yeltsin sacked Primakov's government shortly thereafter and replaced him with Sergei Stepashin as new prime minister. Vladimir Putin's meteoric rise from relative obscurity to the Russian presidency in the course of a few short months of 1999 has been attributed to his intimacy with the family as a protégé of Berezovsky and Yumashev. By the end of 1999, the family had persuaded Yeltsin to name Putin his political successor and candidate for the presidency. Berezovsky's acquaintance with Putin dated back to the early 1990s, when the latter, as deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, helped Logovas establish a car dealership. They enjoyed friendly relations. On occasion, Berezovsky took Putin skiing with him in Switzerland. In February 1999, when Berezovsky's political standing looked uncertain because of his clash with Primakov over Aeroflot, Putin, then director of the FSB, made a bold gesture of friendship by showing up at a birthday party for Berezovsky's wife. "I absolutely do not care what Primakov thinks of me," Putin told Berezovsky on that night. That was the beginning of the political alliance. According to the Times, Spanish police discovered that on up to 5 different occasions in 1999, Putin had secretly visited a villa in Spain belonging to Berezovsky. In mid-July 1999, the family dispatched Berezovsky to Biarritz, where Putin was vacationing, to persuade him to accept the position of prime minister and the role of heir apparent. On the 9th of August, Yeltsin sacked the government of Sergei Stepashin and appointed Putin prime minister, amid reports that Berezovsky had masterminded the reshuffle. Putin's principal opponents were the former prime minister Evgeny Primakov and the mayor of Moscow Yuri Luzkov, backed by the Fatherland All-Russia Alliance. To counter this group in the Duma elections of 1999, Berezovsky was instrumental in the creation, within the space of a few months, of the Unity Party, with no ideology other than its support for Putin. Later he disclosed that the source of Unity's funding, with Putin's knowledge and consent, was Aeroflot. Aeroflot. In the 1999 election, Berezovsky campaigned as a Putin loyalist and won a seat in the Duma, representing the North Caucasian Republic of Karachivo-Cherkassia. During the Duma election campaign, Berezovsky's ORT-TV served as an extremely effective propaganda machine for the Putin camp, using aggressive attack reporting and programming to denigrate and ridicule Putin's rivals, Primakov and Luzkov. Tactics strongly criticized as undue interference with the media, but Unity got a surprisingly high score in the elections, paving the way for Putin's election victory in spring 2000. Conflict with Putin and emigration. Berezovsky's disagreements with Putin became public 3 weeks into Putin's presidency. On the 8th of May 2000, Berezovsky and Abramovich were spotted together at Putin's invitation-only inauguration ball in Moscow. But on the 31st of May, Berezovsky sharply attacked the constitutional reform proposed by the president, which would give the Kremlin the right to dismiss elected governors. In an open letter to Putin published in Kommersant, Berezovsky, then a Duma deputy, said that he would be obliged to vote against the president's legislative project, which was directed toward changing the state's structure and represented a threat to Russia's territorial integrity and democracy. On the 17th of July, Berezovsky resigned from the Duma, saying he did not want to be involved in the country's ruin and the restoration of an authoritarian regime. In August, Berezovsky's media attacked Putin for the way he handled the sinking of the Kursk submarine, blaming the death of 118 sailors on the Kremlin's reluctance to accept foreign help. In September, Berezovsky alleged that the Kremlin had attempted to expropriate his shares in ORT and announced that he would put his stake into a trust to be controlled by prominent intellectuals. In an article in The Washington Post in 2000, Berezovsky argued that in the absence of a strong civil society and middle class, it may sometimes be necessary for capitalists to interfere directly in the political process of Russia as a counterweight to ex-communists who hate democracy and dream of regaining lost positions. Berezovsky took legal action against the journalist Paul Klebanov, who accused him of various crimes. In October, in an interview in Le Figaro, Putin announced that he would no longer tolerate criticism of the government by media controlled by the oligarchs. If necessary, we will destroy those instruments that allow this blackmail, he declared. Responding to a question about Berezovsky, he warned that he had a cudgel in store for him. The state has a cudgel in its hands that you use to hit just once, but on the head. We haven't used this cudgel yet. We've just brandished it. The day we get really angry, we won't hesitate to use it. In the same month, Russian prosecutors revived the Aeroflot fraud investigation and Berezovsky was questioned as a witness. On the 7th of November 2000, Berezovsky, who was traveling abroad, failed to appear for further questioning and announced that he would not return to Russia because of what he described as constantly intensifying pressure on me by the authorities and President Putin personally. Essentially, he said, I'm being forced to choose whether to become a political prisoner or a political emigrant. Berezovsky claimed that Putin had made him a suspect in the Aeroflot case simply because ORT had spoken the truth about the sinking of the submarine Kursk. In early December, his associate Nikolai Glushkov was arrested in Moscow and Berezovsky dropped the proposal to put ORT stake in trust. Divestment from Russian holdings. 2001 was the year of systematic takeover by the government of privately owned television networks, in the course of which Berezovsky, Guzinski and Patarkatsishvili lost most of the media holdings, prompting one of them to warn of Russia turning into a banana republic. In a letter to the New York Times, in February, Berezovsky and Patarkatsishvili sold the stake in ORT to Roman Abramovich, who promptly ceded editorial control to the Kremlin. Berezovsky later claimed that there was a secret understanding that Nikolai Glushkov would be released from prison as part of the deal, a promise that was never fulfilled. In April, the government took control of Vladimir Guzinsky's NTV. Berezovsky then moved to acquire a controlling stake in a smaller network, TV6, made Patarkatsishvili its chairman, and offered employment to hundreds of locked-out NTV journalists. Almost immediately, Patarkatsishvili became a target of police investigation and fled the country. In January 2002, a Russian arbitration court forced TV6 into liquidation. The liquidation of TV6 was precipitated by Lukoil, a partly state-owned minority shareholder, using a piece of legislation that was almost immediately repealed. In 2001, Berezovsky and Patarkatsishvili ended their involvement in Sibneft for a $1.3 billion fee from Roman Abramovich. This transaction was the subject of a later dispute in the UK commercial courts, with Berezovsky alleging that he had been put under pressure to sell his stake to Abramovich at a fraction of the true value, an allegation that the court rejected. In 2006, Berezovsky sold the Kommersant newspaper and his remaining Russian assets.